this meeting of the Planning Commission to order. A couple of notes. We have quite a few people here this evening. If you would please turn your cell phones off. If you have to take a call, please take it out in the hall. Let's be respectful of other people who are speaking. If you come to speak on one of the items, you'll have 2 minutes to speak, and we have a timer. We don't need any cheering, booing, clapping, that kind of thing. If you want to speak, you can give me a card, and they're out by the door, and then I'll put you in the queue, or we'll call for whoever's in the room. When you come up, be sure to state your name in the microphone, and you have 2 minutes from that point. Let's try to keep comments this evening on point with the issue before the Planning Commission, not editorialize on other aspects of things. So with that being said, let's move on to the approval of the minutes for the last meeting. Do I have a motion? Discussion? Come on.
I'll make the motion. Motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay. Matt made the motion and Carolyn seconds. Any discussion? Matt?
Yes.
Andreas?
Yay.
Clark?
Yay.
Sarah?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Adrian?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Brenda?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Okay, the minutes are approved. The chair has nothing to report. Does the vice chair have anything to report?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. And the director?
Just a few quick things. One thing that Planning Commission should know is that the City Council, I don't know if they updated you at your last meeting, but they adopted the changes to the design review ordinance recently. And so any application that comes in, I think from this point forward, is going to be under a new process. That process basically means that all of the new construction that is subject to that ordinance is kind of come through the Planning Commission. It used to start at a staff level, and then we would, if it met standards and no one really had any issues, we'd approve it. Because of the nature of some of those projects and high profile aspect of them, that ordinance changes that. So now all of those new things will come to you. So for example, a recent project that has gotten a lot of media attention is the Convention Center Hotel. That actually was eligible and met standards to be approved at a staff level. And so they need to make a few corrections to their plans to meet zoning, but it's essentially approved at this point. If that were to come through in a month from now, it would have to go through the early engagement process and to the Planning Commission. So just to give you guys a heads up, we're seeing a big increase in the number of those applications. So we're going to kind of monitor that to see what it means to the workload. The workload of the Planning Commission over the last few months has been relatively light, but we're in this kind of weird period where our total applications for the year are up 28% over last year, which means they're up about pushing 40% from 5 years ago. So we're trying to figure out what that means. But right now, a lot of those are staff level types of things, or if they are big projects that need to come to the Planning Commission, they're incomplete. And so we're waiting on applicants to bring things up. That's why we've had a couple of agendas in a row with only 2 items or less. But
Sorry, Matt. Nick, can you briefly tell us what makes a project eligible? And also, when it's eligible, what is the process?
Yeah, so it depends. We have probably a dozen different types of applications that could potentially come through the Planning Commission. Some are required by ordinance too, so zoning amendments, street closures, all of those things that you know about are required to come here. Others, like special exceptions, subdivisions, unless they're associated with something else, like a plan development. Up until recently, all of the design reviews were eligible for staff level. The other thing that we do, and all of our historic preservation items that wouldn't come through the Planning Commission, that makes up about 40% of our total workload is preservation work. So a lot of those things are things that just right now they're minor. One thing that we've seen a huge increase in are what we call zoning verification letters. And those are almost always done because a property is going through some transaction or getting ready to develop. And that's where we've seen the biggest increase. Most of those are downtown properties. And we know that we're seeing a huge increase in potential downtown development, meaning people are coming to meet with us about their projects, figuring out what they need to do, what the rules are, what the process is, and we're going to start seeing some applications. So, I mean, we have a couple of pretty significant projects that are in that stage yet that we don't have details to make public yet, but they're going to be a significant increase.
The size of the project that makes it eligible?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it depends. It varies from zoning district. So, for example, downtown, a building on the corner if it's under 375 feet, it meets standards. It's just approved at the staff level. If it's over, then it's coming to the Planning Commission on the new ordinance. If it's mid-block, that goes down to 100 feet. If it's in Sugar House, it's depending on the use and square footage, things like that. So we do anticipate that our workloads are going to be fairly heavy over the next, the second half of this calendar year and into next year. We also have a number of text amendments that we're working on. Some are in anticipation of construction impacts downtown and finding ways that we can help offset the impact to businesses and things like that so that we have some flexibility in where they temporarily put signs up and what types of signs and things like that. And if they need to, for whatever reason, drop below a zoning regulation while construction's going on, for example, if they have a minimum parking or landscaping requirement and that needs to be removed so someone can put in a new storm drain, those things can all be accomplished and we have some flexibility there. And we're also running out of spaces to stage construction. And so our ordinance has to accommodate that and figure out a way to make it happen. So needless to say, this summer is going to be pretty crazy downtown. If you haven't heard, probably the biggest project that's going to be happening is that UTA needs to replace the track that goes through the intersection of 400 South and Main Street. So both of those sections are going to be closed to vehicles. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens there, but it also gives us an idea of what would happen if we start closing streets down to cars in our city. So there could be some positives of that as well. Just to give you really quickly an idea of what types of projects are coming. One of the big things is the rezoning of the city's fleet block. This has been a project that has been out there for at least 10 years, but we are finally at the point where we're writing a new zoning code that would apply to the fleet block and then eventually be transitioned to other parts of the granary because of the unique nature of the uses that are there and the desire to maintain some of that light industrial types of use, but mix in residential and things like that. That's what we're looking at. And then we're also looking at some changes to other ordinances. You've been briefed on some of those. Parking is going to start this summer. So we'll start breaking that up and briefing the Planning Commission on a new parking chapter. And then the other big one is we have what we're calling right now an affordable housing overlay, which actually is more of an incentive-based type of thing near transit stations to to provide incentives to offset the cost of building an affordable unit, because an affordable unit costs just as much to build as a market rate unit. And so if we allow things like additional building height near transit or other types of incentives like that, then hopefully it can tip the scales so that we can start getting more easily affordable housing projects. And we're also working on an adaptive reuse ordinance that's going to be pretty big, because what that basically does, and I think you guys have had a briefing on that last fall, but it essentially allows existing buildings to be reused for basically any kind of use that's otherwise allowed in that zoning district, if the building systems are upgraded to be more sustainable. So it's a way that we're reducing the demolition, particularly of our older historic buildings that may not be otherwise protected in a historic district or as a landmark status, but offer some flexibility from zoning regulations so that they can, so there's more incentive to reuse those types of things. So it's going to be a busy summer for us. We're already looking, the next agendas progressively get bigger as we go. So we're going to try to keep those at a reasonable length and time so that we're not spending more than 3 to 4 hours per meeting. So that's it.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep.
Okay, we'll move on to our first item, which is a street vacation at 538 East 14th Avenue. Ashley?
Good evening. So this is a request by the property owners of 538 East 14th Avenue for the city to vacate a portion of right-of-way that abuts their property. The purpose of the request is to reconcile the location of fencing and landscaping within the city-owned park strip. In this aerial photo, the yellow box highlights the property lines of the applicant's property. You can see the fenced-in backyard area extends outside of the property bounds into the right-of-way. I put a red circle around that area. The city council does have final approval authority for street vacations, and if granted, approximately 850 square feet of park strip area would be vacated, declared surplus property, and sold to the applicants for a fair market value. And this is some street view photos of the existing encroachment. You can see that fencing and some landscaping improvements go the whole way to the back of curb on H Street. And this is just a quick background on how the situation came to be from the applicant's perspective. In 2004, the applicants purchased the property, and 2 years later, they applied for a building permit to replace an existing chain link fence. And it was at this time they discovered that a portion of their fenced-in backyard was encroaching into the city-owned right-of-way. The city directed them to pursue a revocable permit, which legalized the encroachment, and that agreement was good for 10 years, and there were no costs associated with it. In 2018, Real Estate Services Division notified the applicants that their permit had expired, but at this time the city policy regarding encroachments had changed, and the city does now charge residents with encroachments to lease the right-of-way on an annual basis at fair market cost. So they would have to have a yearly lease and pay to have these improvements in the right-of-way rather than it was at no cost before. But the applicants chose to pursue vacation of the right-of-way of the park strip area rather than pay to lease it from the city. So the scope of request, the current area of encroachment measures approximately 1,150 square feet. And the applicants originally requested that that entire area be vacated. But when I routed this out to other city departments for their review, engineering and transportation both had concerns about selling the entire width of the park strip because it might prevent the construction of a future sidewalk in this area. They did indicate that 6 feet of width would be adequate area if they did ever want to put a sidewalk through here. So the applicants agreed to reduce the request by 6 feet. So it's now 17 feet by 50 feet, which is about 850 square feet of area, all within the park strip. And if it is approved as requested, the applicants would have to remove all improvements that fall within 6 feet of the back of curb on H Street. So if you look at this picture, it's probably about one fence panel of width they would have to take out, basically just move the fence in. I did want to mention that we explored the option of closing the entire length of the park strip on the east side of the parcel to try to maintain a rectangular parcel, but Public Utilities told us that there's actually a water main that cuts through at an angle through the north part of that park strip, so just kind of the northeast corner around that area, there's a water main, so we decided that we would support the smaller request and not the whole park strip because Public Utilities couldn't support it. And we do not have, the zoning ordinance doesn't have specific standards of approval for street vacations, but we do analyze it against Utah State Code. City Council has an adopted policy related to street closures, and then also the applicable city master plans. This is just a summary of the findings included in the staff report. But staff finds that neither public interest nor any person would be materially injured by the street vacation, would not deny any access to other properties. The city would obtain fair market value for the land, which would go into the general fund. Vacation would not be in conflict with the Avenues Master Plan or the Salt Lake City Urban Design Element, which are the two relevant planning documents for this area. It's also highly unlikely this portion of H Street will ever need to be widened. I pointed out on our field trip to the site today that it's at the very top of H Street, and it's kind of an isolated block from the rest of the avenues. There's no cross streets that run through, and it does dead end to the north, so traffic in that area is probably going to the park that's to the north, or it's probably residents that live in that area using that street, so I don't think H Street will ever need to be widened. And also improvements that encroach into and also prevent access to the public right of way in this area. They've been in existence for at least 20 years based on aerial imagery, and the city now has an opportunity to benefit financially from the occupation. So planning staff does support this request. We are recommending that the Planning Commission forwards a favorable recommendation to City Council, who will have the final approval authority.
Thanks. Any questions for Ashley right now?
Just one quick general question. Does the city still do revocable permits?
I think we still do, but just the policy has changed that we now charge for them instead of we have in the past, like in this situation, not charged anything for the encroachments. So now they enter essentially a lease.
Yeah, and the revocable permit requires a lease anyway. We're granting somebody some right to use public space, basically.
Anything else right now? Okay, is the applicant here?
They are here.
They are? Okay, we can have them come up.
Okay. Yeah, they don't have a presentation, but I'm sure they can answer questions.
Okay. Just be sure to get close to the mic and state your name for the record.
Okay. I'm Justin Miller.
Jody Miller.
Hi.
You're the property owners.
We are.
Anybody have questions for them? Concerns? Plead your case.
Well, I actually did a great job of pleading our case for us, but like she said, we moved into the house in 2004. There was already a fence there. And as far as I can tell, like Ashley said, that fence has been there for a very, very long time. So we decided to tear the chain link fence down, build a wooden fence, and at the time I thought, well, let's go talk to the city to make sure we're doing the right thing, and we did. And we got the permit, or we got the lease, or the revocable permit. And then 10 years later, oh, by the way, that's not free anymore. It's actually, I want to say $20,000 a year. So, or not a year, several $1,000s a year, $20,000 for the 10-year lease.
Okay. So no questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you. Would you just step back, please? Sure. And we'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone from the community council here that wants to speak on this? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on this? Okay, seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission. Do we have any questions we need Ashley for, or?
Ashley, I just have one question for you.
Okay, Ashley, come on back.
I'm just curious if there's a time limit for when they would have to remove those improvements.
At this time, they haven't been asked to remove the improvements because they did apply for this vacation and they're going through the process to pursue purchasing it. I don't think that they would be required to touch the encroachments until it was heard by City Council.
So who monitors that? Like, if the improvements, once the purchase has been made, who monitors that that the improvements have been removed from the encroachment?
The Real Estate Services Division.
Oh, okay.
They actually handle these mainly. It's because planning typically handles street closures and alley closures, so.
I mean, it wasn't terribly related, but I was curious. Thanks.
Question?
No?
Yeah, it appears, I'm looking at the aerial view on page 4, it appears that across the street from this property, there is a fairly wide park strip for the properties across the street with the sidewalk already built in and so forth. Is that correct? And on the side of the street where the applicants are, there's no sidewalk at all, at least for their house and all 3 houses below them. Is that true too?
Yeah, it appears so. So on H Street, the east side of H Street, it's not a completely continuous sidewalk the whole length of it, but the further you move down, there is a continuous sidewalk on the east side.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of sidewalks on the west side in general on that street.
Okay. So would there be, in the future, we would have to, if we plan to do this, to do a sidewalk through here, all of these properties would be disturbed in some way because this 6 foot would not be wide enough to have a sidewalk and a park strip, right? It would just be wide enough for a sidewalk.
Yeah, probably.
So why did they make that decision? 6 foot instead of, I don't know, 9 feet?
I think that was just the minimum possible width that they could get just a sidewalk in. I'm just assuming that if they did build a sidewalk on the west side of H Street in this area, in front of this encroachment or this vacated area, it would just be sidewalk and there wouldn't be a park strip for this 50 feet of length.
Okay, well, but we do have a 17-foot right-of-way there available all up and down the street, so we could build a park strip if we had enough space for the rest of these things.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know what you meant by a park strip. I mean, there is a park strip, but right now it essentially looks like it's the front yards of all these properties.
Well, I meant the actual physical park strip. I'm looking at the right-of-way, so, okay. I guess my only sort of concern with this would be that we're giving up the opportunity to have a park strip on the east side of H Street for like ever. So I am wondering, I mean, we could always have we're setting a precedent too, that's just not going to happen. And a lot of the character of the avenues is having a park strip with large trees and so forth, as you see across the street on H Street. So I'm just wondering, I'm just raising that as an issue for reducing this area for reducing the right-of-way area to only 6 feet. Now, that wouldn't bother me too much if they were the only ones on the block, but I'm sure that if the city came through there and wanted to build a proper sidewalk with a park strip, that the other neighbors would also want that same consideration. So if we don't have a concern with that, then that's okay.
I guess I'll add to that because that is an interesting point. I mean, what is the likeliness that a sidewalk is ever going to be built there? Is that in any sort of long-term plan for the city, or is that just a just-in-case scenario?
So the city does have master plan policies of adding sidewalk where it's not currently missing. Obviously, a place like this that's kind of off the beaten path and tucked away is a lower priority. So I think you can read the tea leaves that it would be a very long time before there's sidewalk installed on that street.
Any other thoughts?
So they don't have to move their fence and everything else. Was it ever explored to just lay an easement on there for a sidewalk in the future that then the city could come claim it should we ever want it in the future? And then they wouldn't have to move the fence, they would maintain. Was that ever looked at as an option, or is there no reason that's not a solution?
Do you mean maintaining city ownership of the area, or?
I was putting an easement over it saying, you guys can leave as is, but there's an easement here. It's an 8-foot easement for a future sidewalk. And if we want it, we're going to come get it.
But the city actually
But,
owns it.
but in the meantime, the city sells the
The
piece
city
to
sells the
them.
piece to them.
Oh, I see. That's part of that.
Value a little bit,
Save them some money.
save them some money.
Yeah, it's not an option I explored. I would have to check with real estate services if they would support that.
Nick, do you know if the city has a policy of they have to own the property end of the sidewalk, or do they put them on easements?
Going back to everyone knows about this instance, but going back to the Main Street issue back from the late 90s, I think that's when that happened. Was it that long ago? Early 2000s? Seems like it was
About 2000.
another lifetime ago for many people, but we generally don't like to put public sidewalks on private property because they can't be kind of those free spaces where people can do whatever they could do otherwise, right? The freedom of speech, freedom to gather, things like that. And so we prefer not to do that for sidewalks like this. We do them in places where it's the only option. So a lot of mid-block walkways downtown are across alleyways or across private properties and things like that. But when they're out on the street, we prefer that it's public property. It doesn't mean that's not an option,
Right.
but
For the applicant, can we come back up real quick? Would you care if there was an easement on it? That way you wouldn't have to move the fence?
No.
wouldn't have
I
to
don't
do
have,
anything.
we don't have a preference at all. It's just, the idea is to just not have to tear down the fence.
Land to be
And obviously,
cheaper, you wouldn't have to work with it. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, what was the question?
I mean, it would be cheaper because it would be.
Sure.
But it could be potentially you live there, or people who sell their house could come through, the city would say, got to move the fence, we're building a sidewalk.
Well, that's where we're
That
at
would
today,
suck.
right? So, yeah, that's,
And
we
with the
don't,
lease, it was like that too.
even with the revocable, permit, that was still, they could revoke it at any time, and in fact did, too. So you have to move the fence anyway, so.
All right, thanks. I'll make a motion.
Okay, thank you.
So based on the information in the staff report, public testimony, and discussion by the planning commission, I move the planning commission forward a positive recommendation to the city council to approve PLN PCM 2018-00561 street vacation at 538 East 14th Avenue. And with this recommendation, though, that staff and the city council maybe explore using an easement instead, as an option, an 8-foot easement on that strip rather than vacating the whole property. 10 feet,
9.
whatever a normal sidewalk would be. That option is explored by staff and the city council as another alternative.
Could I ask for clarification on that? So would you expand the vacation request to the current area of encroachment the whole way to back a curb and put an easement through it? Or would
We
you?
vacate the whole we vacate the whole section and just lay a easement that would be the width of a standard sidewalk and park strip on the piece of property, even though it is private land, should a future sidewalk ever be built.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, we got a second by Brenda. Any other discussion? Okay, let's start with Amy.
Yes.
Brenda,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Agree.
Adrian,
Yes.
Weston,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Andreas,
Yay.
and Matt.
Yes, and just to clarify, if the proposal goes through as is, that's fine, but I just think this other option should be explored. Okay, thanks.
Okay, the motion passes. It'll move on to the city council. Okay, our second item tonight is a conditional use for a group home at 661 East, 100 South. Anna, no, that's Mayara, that's it.
All right. Okay.
All right, so this is a request by Team Stay, representing the Other Side Academy, to operate a large group home on the property located at 661 East, 100 South. The site would be an expansion of the Other Side Academy's campus located adjacent to the subject property. So in yellow, you can see the property being requested for conditional use now, and in orange, where the current campus is. The Other Side Academy is a recovery facility that offers vocational and life skills training, as well as educational programs for individuals coming from incarceration and homelessness resulting from a history of substance abuse. Residents are required to enroll for a minimum of 2 years, during which they live on site and participate in vocational trainings. These vocational trainings are done through affiliated business entities and currently include a moving service, a thrift store, a landscape maintenance service, and occasionally a food truck. This project at 661 East, 100 South involves the conversion of an existing building on site to accommodate the residential, administrative, and educational functions of the group home. The existing building was created in 1993 as an assisted living facility and currently features 46 sleeping rooms, kitchen, dining room, office, and space for recreational and educational activities. The applicant is proposing to house 164 individuals in this group home without any modifications to the building or the site. A conditional use is an allowed use unless appropriate conditions cannot be applied to mitigate potential adverse impacts. So the first thing we considered in this proposal was the neighborhood compatibility and the potential impacts. And looking at the surrounding properties, we found that the subject property is surrounded by a diversity of uses, including residential, institutional, commercial uses, and vacant properties. The staff also found that the proposed group home would replace a use of similar intensity, which is the assisted living facility that took place at that location. We also considered the impact of the vocational training business that's part of the group home program. And on this subject property, the vocational training business would be limited to administrative functions. So the bulk of the operations would not be expended. Lastly, we look at the conditions of the existing property, and I want to make a correction. In the staff report, I state that the property is fenced on both sides in the rear. It's actually just the west side that's fenced, although that doesn't really have a lot of impact considering the adjacent uses to the west and the north. But the property also has adequate exterior lighting, has vehicular and pedestrian access, and sufficient parking for staff. We also consider the proximity restrictions for group homes in our zoning ordinance, and this proposal does not comply with a zoning requirement that a group home be located at least 100 feet away from another group home. However, our city attorney's office has identified in the past that this provision is unenforceable due to its potential illegality under the Fair Housing Act. So we're not imposing that restriction. And then lastly, we consider the group home licensing and maximum occupancy of the building. The zoning ordinance requires that the group home obtain a license from the Utah Department of Human Services. And to obtain that license, the proposed group home will need to comply with state-specific standards for establishment operations and physical conditions. These standards include minimum room size and number of toilet and shower stalls. That will ultimately determine the maximum occupancy of this building. We received a total of 5 comments. 3 of them were in opposition of this project, and they were related to the impacts of the growing campus and the expected number of residents. The staff acknowledged the increase in density, but finds that the impacts created by the group home will be no greater than another residential use. Given these considerations, planning staff finds that the proposed use is expected to operate compatibly in its location and with minimal impacts to the surrounding properties. Therefore, we're recommending that the Planning Commission approve the proposal with the conditions that the facility obtain the license from the state and that the applicant obtain the permits for the change of use.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayara right now?
I have a question, Mara. So, in approving a large group home, in the ordinance, is there a number of occupants that comes with, or is that solely reliant on the fire and safety? If we approve a large group home, what does that really mean?
So the definition establishes a minimum of 7 individuals, but it doesn't have a maximum. So we are relying on the state licensing for that.
So theoretically, if we approved a large group home, and then DHS could limit the number, it may or may not be 164. If DHS says, no, you can't accommodate that, they
Yes.
could reduce it.
Yes, correct.
Is that like an internal application? Is that a public process? Or is that just something that they would apply for and administratively get approved or denied?
I'm not sure how it works, but I did include in the attachments the regulations.
Yeah.
And one of the standards, for example, is the room has to have at least 600 square feet per individual in that room. So if they don't have that space, they wouldn't be able to accommodate that number of people.
So it's 600 square feet per
Oh,
one
six-
person?
60 square feet, sorry.
60, I was like, that's a lot.
Sorry.
It's a lot more than I have.
I'll take that.
No, 60 square feet per individual in a room.
Okay, so if you were going to have 2 people in a room, that room would have to be 120 square feet, at least.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any idea how the configuration of the existing assisted living?
I did look at their plans, and I think their rooms are about 250 square feet, would accommodate 4 individuals.
Okay, thanks.
How many people are already being accommodated in the campus?
I believe 120, but the applicant is
We can ask
probably
the
the
applicant,
best.
yeah.
Okay. That's all.
Anyone else for right now? Okay, you can step back for the moment. Would the applicant come up?
I'm just going to ask for a minute so I can put in their,
Oh, sure.
I didn't know they had a presentation.
So as the applicant, you have 10 minutes.
All right.
And I'm just going to tell you that, you know, we've seen other applications from the Other Side Academy, and we appreciate what you do and think it's a great organization. We just like tonight to focus on the issues related to this conditional use if we can.
Certainly, and we'll try to be very expeditious in our comments. We recognize that we took a significant amount of time on our last conditional use permit, and we appreciate the tolerance of the Planning Commission in going through that. And I can give a brief overview in just 60 seconds of who the Other Side, and then talk about the project.
Okay.
The Other Side Academy is a residential life skills program. Our average student's been arrested 25 times. They are coming off the streets, out of the jails. They've been 9 out of 10 have been homeless. A number of our students have come from the Rio Grande area. These people are coming for a chance to change their lives. We currently have about 95 students on our existing campus that we have, both men and women. We don't charge the students anything, and we don't take any government money. We run vocational training schools to help bring our revenue. One is a moving company, so the students who are working on that are out in the community working all day. They're not back on campus. It's a top-rated moving company in Salt Lake City based on the reviews and based upon the customer service that our students provide. We also run a thrift boutique. It's located on State Street in Murray. So a number of our students travel there every day and work there during the retail hours. So the use of the building would be for primarily for sleeping, evening activities, some administrative functions during the day, and then there's also a commercial kitchen in that. We're having success with the program. 95% of our graduates are living lives after completing the 2-year program, are drug-free, crime-free, have stable housing, are employed. And we've had success in cleaning up the neighborhood. This is when we first moved into the area. It's now been cleaned up and straightened. There had been a place where a lot of vagrancy and homelessness had been taking place. The crime rate was lowered in the area by, no, I'm sorry, I was thinking you could see all this.
I think you got the wrong, oh, there, maybe that's it.
There.
I'm not sure he
It's window.
Sorry.
There we go. So this was what it looked like when we first moved in. We've been able to clean it up, clean up the area. The report we had gotten previously from the Salt Lake Police that the crime in the area had dropped. We're helping the population become a working, healthy population. The area we're talking about, as you mentioned, is the avenues. You can see the area in yellow. That is our current campus. We currently are housing students in apartments in the 2 buildings on the east side of 700 East. The plan would be to move them from those apartments into the avenue, so it really consolidates our campus and actually lowers the traffic that's going across 700 East, which is a busy, dangerous intersection. So we would be able to consolidate our students all together. Those apartments, our plan is to make them available as affordable housing units for our graduates so that they can have a transitional space. Once they graduate the program, they're a little separated, but they still have the support of the community when they move there. The apartment building is a 3-story building, and the main floor would be used for administrative offices, kitchen, dining room, recreation room, laundry, exercise offices, and then there'd be 20 apartments that were used for the assisted living buildings on each. We've had local support. We have really good relationships with the local law enforcement. This is a meeting set up with Fred Ross and the UTA police of a lunch we had with our students. We've been very involved in giving back to Salt Lake. The mayor's office recently called us to help move the people out of the Georgia apartments when it was red tagged. They had 72 hours to move. We moved many of them on a volunteer basis at no cost as our way of giving back. We've moved the police department several times. We recently co-hosted the Homeless Candlelight Vigil, and we help with manpower needs of a number of nonprofit organizations in the city. We feel like we're making an impact in the Rio Grande. This isn't through our private initiatives. A number of our students have spent time, over 80% have spent time in the Rio Grande area. And by bringing them out, we think we're helping reduce that. We think with this, we've invested $4.2 million in purchasing this building. It's of private money, not through any taxpayer money, to try to address this chronic problem of the opioid crisis and homelessness and the criminality that is involved with that. 160 beds, up to 160 beds would be added to the solution available to Salt Lake City, and we're also getting, this is being a model campus, and we're getting regular visits from around the country of people saying, you know, what is this? And so they're getting to experience what great things are happening in Salt Lake City. So we would ask for your consideration for for our application for the conditional use.
Okay, thank you. Hang on a minute. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant right now?
So, can I ask you what will be, or if we have a map, can we go back to the map here on that
Maybe
shows all of the properties that you currently, well, that was it.
One
One right there.
Forward now.
There you
Here
go.
you go. So you currently own everything in yellow, is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
You own it. Right, and so when this is completed and finished, will you still own all of these properties?
Yes.
Okay, and so which one of them will continue to be part of your academy?
So really, the plan is for the buildings on the west side of 700 East would be considered the campus of the Other Side Academy. The 2 apartment buildings on the east side would be used for graduate and transitional housing for our students who've graduated. So they'll no longer be in the program, but they'll still have the community and support of the program close to them.
And do your students have any kind of supervision in any of their 24-hour activities besides actual classes?
Supervision as far as staff?
Yes.
Yes, we have about 1 paid staff for every 10 students.
Okay. And what's the role of that paid staff person?
Ours is a peer-to-peer model, so our staff are people who've come from the same environment. We're based on a model out of California called Delancey Street Foundation, and our staff have gone through the Delancey Street program, so they have lived in a community like this themselves. They've changed, transformed their lives, and are now 10 years removed from that lifestyle. So they're peers and examples of how to do that. We don't, we feel that our students can relate to someone who's been through, in their shoes and been through that process of that change process.
But there is no restrictions on the student moving around or through the neighborhood or
Oh, there
walking
is.
downtown and stuff like that?
Our students don't leave campus without permission. They don't go to work without permission. They are stayed. If they choose to leave, then they're and leave without permission, then they're no longer in the program.
So okay, all right. Yeah. Did you? Yeah, go ahead.
What's the average age of your students?
I would say it's in the mid-30s. We have some in their early 20s. We have some that are in their late 50s. But I would say average is around in the mid-30s.
Thank you.
What are the current number of beds that are part of your existing facility, like existing kind of space?
We have, I know it was brought up about the rooms per, or the space per, we did receive a variance for a higher density from the Department of Human Services with the recovery residence license that we had received. With them being older homes, they don't have, some of them are smaller than you might want in a home, but they provided, we have bathrooms accessible to each room. And I would say, I would say we currently have space for about 120 students
Currently.
with our current.
So will you then have 160 in addition to the 120, or how many
No.
new?
No, we would, that includes the apartments, and we would not be using those for our program. So we'd transfer, this would give us about 40 additional capacity.
And you'd have
about-
and then would you keep all 120 existing units then as graduate sort of affordable housing, or, you know?
They would be more like standard apartments where rather than dormitory style, you might have one person in a bedroom or 2 people in an apartment or 3 people in an apartment like that.
So I'm just trying to get, I'm trying to get an idea of like how many total beds we're talking about the, you know, your academy kind of managing within this kind of block.
So
So
Once-
how
once
many
it's
are in your
completed.
main building?
So you'll have 164 beds in the main building, the new proposed one.
the proposed one, yeah.
And then how many beds will you be maintaining in your other buildings?
So we would continue to provide residential services in the Armstrong Mansion. We have about 30 bed space available in that one. We have the building just to the north. It's under where the 667 is called the Annie's Cottage. That's currently our women's residence. We'd probably either keep that as women's residence or turn it into staff residence and move the women into the Armstrong Mansion.
How many beds?
And that has, right now, it has 18 students living in that.
20 and 30 is
So
58, so it's about 210.
Well, you kind of rolled off to me that's 48 beds, but you said you have 120, so that's a pretty significant reduction in your existing facilities. You follow me? So you said you had 120 existing beds in those
Well,
facilities,
including the apartments, so,
including the apartments, right?
yeah. So
But then, and then you're going to move a lot of these people to a new facility. So you've now got 164 beds. And that sounds like that 120 beds then is now being dropped down to closer to 50 beds based on what you just told me, 30
we
plus
would
18.
have we'd have those in the avenues. We'd maintain what's in the Armstrong Mansion, and we'd maintain what's in Annie's Cottage. We would pull the students out of the 2 apartment buildings.
in the avenues
Yeah,
site.
on the,
And what's the address of the avenue site? Sorry.
so the
that on
one
this
is
map or no?
35. It's 35 South, 100 East.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my mind wrapped around how many beds there will be with this use in all the properties for you, which you will own along 7th East, you know, on that map.
Just for students or
For students and for all graduates and the whole, all being overseen by the, you know, the Other Side Academy.
It's
You got
maybe it'd best for me to lay out each building and the number of
Sure.
beds. So with the Peter Jr., that's 35 South. There's 15 apartments, the 2-bedroom apartments, and if we said 3 people per apartment, that'd be 45.
Okay.
With the Beverly Apartments, which is 45 South, 100 East, there's 8 units there. Each one is a 2-bedroom unit, so that's 16 bedrooms. And if we said 3 people per apartment, that would be 24.
16 bedroom. Okay.
But 8 units times 3.
Okay. Okay.
24. So those would be graduate transitional housing apartments.
Okay.
Then on the student side, we'd have the 160 with the avenues.
The new
We'd have
one.
the 30 with Armstrong Mansion, and we would we'd probably turn the Annie's Cottage into a staff living environment, and that would give us a total of, so we would then transition that and probably have 4 to 6 staff living in there.
From 18, so you'd be down
Yeah.
to, okay. And then my next question, you said that you got a variance from DHS, and how many additional beds did you get permitted in that variance?
Our rooms are structured in a dorm style, so we have bunk beds. So we have, in some of the rooms, the 60 square foot was, it would work if we got 50 square feet per person instead of 60, and those were the rooms we got the variances on.
I'm just trying to understand though, like, so under DHS regulations, you were permitted so many rooms. You have gotten a variance for how many additional rooms?
Yeah. Oh,
How many additional?
I don't remember. I'd
Or how many
have to-
additional people, not rooms, sorry. How many additional beds does that variance permit? You went from, you're not 164, you were at 100, 110. I mean, it's not, there's 45 units currently in the building, right?
in the
No,
avenues?
no, the variance was on the Armstrong Mansion, right?
Yes.
But not on the new facility.
Not on the
We
new
haven't
facility.
approached them yet. We're going through this step first.
Sorry, and then the last question, and then you guys are an opt-in program?
Yes, it's, they have to request, our students have to request to
Request
attend.
participation. Okay. All right. And then what, and remind me again, I think you said it once before, what percentage of students kind of opt in and then kind of remain through the course of it and graduate?
We have about 60% of our students make it the 2 years once they've made their initial commitment.
Okay.
And then to date, 95% of our students who've completed the 2 years have remained out of jail and seem to be on the right path.
I have, just to clarify, on my shaky math, right, is trying to understand that you're not adding 164 new beds. We're talking you're going to be adding 40 to 45 new beds as you reconfigure.
Yes.
So I think that's something, I just wanted to make sure that I was calculating that correctly because I came out with like 44 new beds based on your 120
Yes, that
beds
would
you
be,
currently have.
that'd be correct.
Okay, thanks.
Are any of these rooms handicap accessible?
Yes, we have an elevator in the Armstrong Mansion. Also in the avenues, there's a, with it serving the many senior residents as a former senior living center, it's very accessible for handicap purposes.
Thank you.
So are your students dangerous?
We haven't had one in the 3 years of operation. We haven't had any violence, any issues with law enforcement with our students.
Thank you.
We also, our students get tested on a random basis each month by adult parole and probation. And in the 3 years that they've been doing, we've been in operation 3.5, we haven't had one student fail a drug test. So 100% of the students have been drug-free according to adult parole and probation.
Okay, any more quick questions right now? We'll go to the public hearing and then you'll have another opportunity.
So in light of time consideration, we have a number of students who have come who were interested in this. We've asked only 2 of them to speak because I think you can get a feel rather than have all of them, if that's all right.
That would be wonderful.
If
Thank
that would
you.
be- I can give
Do
you
you
their...
have cards for him?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then you can go ahead and step back. And I'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone from the community council who wants to speak on this? No representative of the community council. Okay, I'll go to the cards first. I have Cindy Cromer. Oh, careful.
Flying Melinda. So my name is Cindy Cromer. I'm a nearby property owner, and I've followed this property for almost 30 years. In 1981, when the Central City Historic District was adopted, there were 3 contributory buildings on this property, a Victorian, a Prairie School, and a Tudor. They were part of the Armstrong-Jones-Madsen compound of buildings which dominated this portion of the block. You can see Armstrong's portrait out in the hall, by the way. He was the mayor. These buildings were demolished after the adoption of the historic district to make way for the assisted living facility. What has transpired then is a story of hazards which should not be associated with any facility serving a vulnerable population. I hold irresponsible property owners and the city accountable for the carnage which has occurred here. There have been 2 fires on the 700 East frontage of the block, both in group homes for adolescents. A 3rd fire destroyed an historic cottage and the garages behind the Madsonia Court on the 100 South side. A gas leak forced the evacuation of the assisted living facility on a cold night. Throughout all this trauma, the city's failure to enforce at the multiple units known as Madsonia Court and at the location of the fire on 700 East compounded the problems of irresponsible ownership. Since 1991, we have lost 5 contributory buildings on this quadrant of the block. The indicators of vandalism continue to accumulate, especially at Madsonia Court. Evacuating vulnerable residents from the assisted living facility during the gas leak was frightening to watch. There's no point in going into the Fair Housing Act or the city's failure to enforce here regarding the conditional use application. What is important, I think, to say that is in the context of what has happened over the past 28 years, it seems reasonable to argue that the people who live at this location need to be able to take care of themselves in case of emergencies, which are likely to continue until the issues at Madsonia Court are resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay, I have a card for Clay Josefsky? Josefsky.
Hi, so
Have 2 minutes.
so my name is Clay Josefsky. I'm a student at the Other Side Academy, and I've been there for 16 months. I was part of the opioid and homeless epidemic that occurred at the Rio Grande, and I'm just here to say that the Other Side Academy has given me a second chance and a shot at redemption on life. And with more beds for this facility, I feel like they could bring hope to the hopeless, as I once was, and that's all I have.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And Andrew Lewis? State your name, and you have 2 minutes.
Andrew Lewis. I'm another student at the Other Side Academy. Been there for 17 months, and this place has changed my life dramatically. I've been in and out of jails, homelessness at the Rio Grande, and this place has just given me hope and an opportunity to go out and work hard every day, have a good attitude, learn how to get along with people. There's currently 95 students, and I'm just, I get to save my life first, and then I get to save somebody else's life. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? It's okay if you don't have a card. You can come up. Get close to the mic, state your name for the record.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dave
you have
DeRocher,
2
Managing
minutes.
Director at the Other Side Academy. There were a lot of questions that were asked earlier, and I may be redundant and answer some of what Tim has already said.
Okay, you have 2 minutes as a public comment.
Okay.
And then when we close that, if people have other questions, maybe you can come up at that point too.
Sure. So again, my name is Dave. I'm the managing director at the Other Side Academy. And I think it's really important to note, we touched on a couple of key things about the students opting in. They can write us a letter from jail, we'll interview them there, and then they can come to us and turn their lives around. Or they can walk in off the street and take a seat on our bench. If we interview them and accept them, they start that day. They need no money. They don't need anything. No Medicaid money, no rich mommy and daddy money, no city, county, federal money. We do it all ourselves. And that really is what separates us from all the other programs. The minute the student gets there, they become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. These social enterprises work as the petri dish because a lot of our population have been to some of the other programs, and in some cases 5 or 6 of them, and it didn't work well for this particular population. But when they come to us, they have as much time as they need, not just to get clean and sober, because that's the easy part, but to experience whole person change, learn to be people of integrity, learn to be honest, learn to be accountable. Those principles and those core values that are important once they graduate, to go back out, reintegrate back into the community, and become productive members. We are 2 years long, but the beautiful thing is 65% of our students are opting to stay longer. They're in their 3rd year, and in some cases their 4th year, because they love who they're becoming. And ladies and gentlemen, they can graduate at 2 years and go live their lives. They want to stay longer to give back to the students who are coming in that are brand new, to be able to be of service to them, and to become better human beings themselves. So it really is more than just a program. It's a community that is helping this population completely reinvent themselves, become the 2.0 version, recalibrate their moral compass, and then help them reintegrate back into the community so that they can become a productive member.
That's your 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no one else, I'll close the public hearing on this item and bring it back up to the commission. Do we want staff and the applicant back?
One more question for the applicant.
Okay, the applicant, and you might as well come up.
Just because I think, would you say that locating all your facilities, I think the answer is important given the conditional use, locating all your facilities close together is a strength of your program, and that there are benefits, and you actually, and the mentoring that kind of happens and the close proximity actually supports and causes less impact on the community, or not? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, we think a consolidated campus is very important for us. Our whole process is one where we build community. Our students have disconnected themselves from family, from any support in community. They've burned their bridges everywhere. So having them learn how to reintegrate, live together, work together, really operate as a family is critical, and being able to use this building will greatly enhance our ability.
And would you say there's cross accountability between the students, and so they're also helping? I mean, for community members who are worried about this facility going in, your program is set up in a way that students are watching other students and helping provide cross accountability.
Yes, that's very important. That is exactly what we do. Is we call it 200% accountability. Each student is 100% accountable for themselves and also 100% accountable for their brothers and sisters. If by chance somebody does something wrong, even if it's insignificant and staff finds out, not only is the person in trouble that did it, but if somebody else knows about it, they're in more trouble than them. So it doesn't take the students long to figure out that I'm no longer going to allow other people's behaviors to impact my life, and everybody starts passing that information and letting us know what's going on. And then we have twice a week, a group setting where the peers get to interact and call each other on their behaviors. That really is where the magic happens. And staff also lives on property, so we are in the trenches with them 24/7 throughout all these processes.
Do you have any outdoor spaces for the students?
We have some space behind where Annie's cottage is and the dining hall is. You can see that. We regularly, most of our students will exercise regularly at Liberty Park or others, but they'll do it in a group where they're always together.
Okay. So do you allow smoking in the buildings?
No.
So where do the residents go to smoke?
They don't, to be part
They're
of the
not
program.
allowed to smoke either?
No.
So one of the concerns I think that neighborhoods have is a lot of loitering around the properties, standing on the porch and smoking and, hanging out. And that's why I'm asking that question about, so if you have any further comments about that.
We've been very intentional about that very thing. We don't allow smoking at the facility, nor any loitering. We don't want people out loitering. We have small areas, as Tim was mentioning, that we play basketball and things like that in the back of the property, but no one's just outside loitering on the porches.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
As you recall, since inception of this of the academy, have you had any problems with law enforcement or fire department or any of that sort?
We had some issues with fire department. We had a hood that didn't meet code, and we had to stop use of that until we could provide. We actually were building a larger dining hall, and they worked with us on variants. They also, a pre-existing fire escape, once we got into it, was out of compliance, and so we re-engineered that and rebuilt that so it was in compliance with the fire department. And currently, I think we're in good standing with all of the fire department. We haven't had any law enforcement issues with any of our students.
So that fire department issue, that was actually staff cost or staff related? It wasn't really
No, it was,
residence?
when we moved in, we installed a fire hood, and the contractor said that it would be appropriate for the stoves. When the fire department came through, they said this isn't the right hood for these kind of stoves, and so we had to make a change there.
Thanks.
I have a question for the planners involved here. Do we have any knowledge of anything that is happening on the Medsonian Apartments project property?
Nothing definitive. We've been approached a number of times over the years by people who want to do everything from try to rehab to demolish and rebuild, and it's a difficult property for a number of reasons.
So is the property available for sale?
We actually had it under contract at one point, but because we couldn't see a way around getting the apartment part demolished, and we didn't feel like we would be able to get it in an appropriate process to get it demolished, we pursued, and then this became available.
I think that it's been for sale for a number of years, but whether or not the property owner actually gets to the point where they're willing to close out on something is another story.
I guess I just have one more question. Are all of these young men with their ties on part of your population?
They are.
All right, thank you.
I have a question for staff, I think. What was the reason that you gave us for waiving of the 800-foot requirement again?
The 800 feet
Yeah.
separation, the attorney's office has found that provision to be unenforceable due to...
Unenforceability, okay.
There are several cases out of the circuit courts of appeal on the distancing issue, and every single one of them has said it's a violation of the Fair Housing Act. And we agree with that. We are in the process of trying to amend the ordinance. There are some issues that the council has encountered with the whole body of that ordinance that's trying to get through, so.
Anything else? Is anyone ready for a motion?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Please do.
Okay, first of all, thank you all for coming. I appreciate the work you've done on those properties. They're really much improved from what they have been for many years. Based on the information listed in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the commission approve the request for conditional use for a large group home at 661 East 100 South as presented in petition PLN PCM 2019-00104 with the conditions listed in the staff report.
Second.
Amy seconds.
I'll second.
Amy seconded.
Oh, sorry.
You did, didn't you? Oh.
She did, but she.
Amy,
I
it
second.
sounds the same, right? Let's start with Amy.
I am really happy to vote yes on this.
Yes.
Brenda. You're so good. Carolyn.
I agree. Thank you for being that special and special security for these individuals.
Thank you.
Adrian.
Yes.
Weston.
I was so moved the first time that you came. I'm glad to see you back and expanding and doing more good for the community. I'm happy to vote yes.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Yes.
Clark.
I'll echo Weston's comments. I remember your previous presentation, and I've been past that block now and seen what you have done, and I'm impressed, and I vote yes.
Thank you.
Andres.
Yay.
Matt.
Really impressed with your model, so yes.
Thank you.
Okay, it passes unanimously.
Thank you.
You have your conditional use.
And just open invitation to any of you who would like to come for a tour, walk through. We'd love to host you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Having no other business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.